These castles weren't built to rule land, they were built to vanish from it. While Europe raised stone towers that pierced the sky, Japan's shadow warriors constructed something far more terrifying: fortresses that disappeared into mountains, dissolved into mist, and left no trace for their enemies to find. No flags flew from their walls, no armies marched through their gates, because the deadliest castles in feudal Japan were the ones you couldn't see. Imagine entire communities vanishing before dawn, strategic strongholds that appeared on no maps, defensive networks so perfectly hidden that samurai armies searched for weeks and found nothing but empty forests and silent peaks. How could entire fortresses disappear? How did ninja clans protect themselves without the towering keeps that defined medieval warfare? And what happened when the most powerful warlords in Japan sent their armies to destroy bases they couldn't locate? If you want to uncover the secrets of history's most invisible fortresses, subscribe now. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the most ingenious defensive strategy you've ever heard of? Let's dive into the shadows. Feudal Japan wasn't a unified nation. It was a patchwork of warring territories, each controlled by powerful warlords called daimyo, who commanded armies of samurai. For over 4 centuries, from the 1100s through the 1600s, these lords fought endless battles for land, resources, and political dominance. Peace was a rare luxury. Violence was the currency of power. The samurai class rose during this chaos, establishing themselves as the elite warrior caste of Japanese society. They followed Bushido, the way of the warrior, emphasizing honor, loyalty, and open combat. Samurai wore distinctive armor, carried family crests, and fought with their identities proudly displayed. Their entire culture revolved around visible strength and recognized authority. But this rigid system created gaps, vulnerabilities that couldn't be addressed through conventional warfare. Political assassination became commonplace. Daimyo needed intelligence on rival territories. Castles required infiltration. Supply lines demanded sabotage. Traditional samurai, bound by their code and their visibility, couldn't perform these shadow operations without disgracing their families. The nobility needed warriors who could work outside the formal military structure, operators who existed in the margins of acceptable warfare. Enter the shinobi, later known as ninja. These weren't mystical beings born from folklore. They were practical mercenaries and specialized agents who emerged from farming communities, mountain villages, and the lower social classes. While samurai followed rigid protocols, ninja adapted to survive. They prioritized mission success over personal glory, effectiveness over honor, and above all, secrecy over recognition. The distinction was brutal and clear. Samurai served openly and died with their names recorded in history. Ninja operated anonymously and vanished without trace. This wasn't romantic, it was survival. Daimyo used ninja for tasks they couldn't acknowledge: infiltrating enemy castles, gathering intelligence, eliminating political threats, and spreading disinformation. When these operations succeeded, the credit went to samurai generals. When they failed, the ninja simply ceased to exist in any official record. But this dangerous profession created an immediate problem. Where could these shadow warriors establish their bases? Traditional castles advertised power through massive walls, elevated positions, and visible military presence. They were designed to be seen, to intimidate, to demonstrate a lord's authority over the landscape. For ninja clans, such structures would be death sentences. Operating as unsanctioned agents meant ninja faced persecution from multiple directions. Rival daimyo hunted them as threats. Samurai despised them as dishonorable. Local authorities viewed them with suspicion. Even the lords who employed them saw them as disposable tools rather than valuable retainers. A ninja clan couldn't build a conventional fortress without painting a target on every member's back. The persecutions were systematic and brutal. When authorities discovered ninja communities, they didn't wage honorable warfare. They massacred entire villages, including women, children, and elderly. No quarter was given because ninja existed outside the social order that provided legal protection. They were classified somewhere between bandits and demons, entities to be eliminated rather than engaged. This environment forced ninja clans to completely reimagine defensive architecture. They couldn't compete with samurai armies in open battle. They lacked the numbers, the armor, and the societal support for conventional warfare. Their survival depended on a different approach, becoming invisible. Not metaphorically invisible through stealth techniques, but literally invisible through strategic geography and architectural innovation. The concept was revolutionary for its time. Instead of building fortresses that projected power, ninja communities constructed bases that projected nothing at all. Their strongholds needed to blend so completely with the natural landscape that enemy scouts could pass within meters without detecting them. These weren't castles in any traditional sense. They were defensive networks disguised as ordinary mountain villages, farming settlements, or pristine wilderness. This wasn't cowardice, it was tactical brilliance born from desperation. Ninja clans understood something that traditional military theory overlooked. The fortress you cannot find is the fortress you cannot destroy. Every samurai army that marched into the mountains searching for ninja bases faced the same maddening reality. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere, protected by defenses that couldn't be sieged because they couldn't be located. The birth of these hidden fortresses marked a fundamental shift in defensive strategy. For the first time in Japanese military history, survival didn't depend on thicker walls or higher towers. It depended on erasure, on architectural and geographic techniques that made entire communities disappear from the physical map while remaining fully operational in the shadows. But how do you hide an entire fortress? How do you construct defensive positions that can shelter dozens or hundreds of people while remaining completely invisible to enemy forces? The answer lay in the one place samurai armies couldn't easily follow, the mountains themselves. Japan's mountainous terrain covers nearly 75% of the archipelago. These weren't gentle hills or rolling landscapes. They were steep, forested peaks with treacherous paths, unpredictable weather, and terrain that could kill the unprepared. For most of Japanese history, mountains represented barriers to trade, obstacles to travel, and regions too difficult to control. But for ninja clans, they represented something else entirely: natural fortifications that required no construction. The isolation these mountains provided was absolute. A samurai army could march through flatlands with relative ease, maintaining supply lines and organized formations. But the moment they entered mountain terrain, everything changed. Narrow paths forced columns to stretch thin and vulnerable. Heavy armor became a liability on steep inclines. Horses struggled or became useless entirely. What took hours to traverse on flat ground could take days in the mountains, and every step forward meant moving further from reinforcements and supplies. This terrain transformed conventional military advantages into critical weaknesses. The largest army meant nothing if it couldn't effectively deploy. The finest armor offered no protection against exhaustion and exposure. Superior numbers became irrelevant when only a dozen men could fit on a mountain path at once. Ninja clans understood that controlling the mountains didn't require matching samurai strength. It required exploiting the environment where strength became a disadvantage. Dense forests provided the second layer of natural defense. Japan's mountain regions were covered in thick vegetation, towering cryptomeria trees, tangled bamboo groves, and undergrowth so dense that visibility dropped to mere meters. These forests weren't decorative, they were tactical assets. A ninja scout could observe enemy movements from elevated positions while remaining completely hidden. Entire groups could relocate through the forest canopy, leaving no trace on the ground below. The forests also created navigational nightmares for invading forces. Without clear landmarks or visible paths, samurai armies relied on guides, who were often unreliable or deliberately misleading. Maps became useless in terrain where every ridge and valley looked identical under forest cover. Armies frequently became disoriented, wasting days searching for targets that were sometimes within a kilometer of their position but completely obscured by vegetation and topography. Climate became another invisible ally. Mountain weather in Japan was notoriously unpredictable and harsh. Fog could roll in within minutes, reducing visibility to arm's length. Temperature drops at elevation could incapacitate soldiers unprepared for the cold. Rain transformed paths into mudslides and rivers into impassable torrents. Snow isolated entire regions for months. These weren't occasional inconveniences. They were regular occurrences that ninja communities learned to anticipate, prepare for, and weaponize. Local knowledge created an insurmountable intelligence gap. Ninja clans lived in these mountains for generations. They knew every path, every water source, every cave system, and every shortcut that didn't appear on any map. This wasn't knowledge gained from study. It was intimate familiarity passed down through families who'd navigated this terrain in darkness, in storms, and under enemy pursuit. A ninja could traverse in hours what took enemy forces days, and they could do it silently, leaving no trail. Secret routes became the circulatory system of hidden fortresses. While samurai armies struggled along obvious paths, ninja used trails invisible to outsiders, streambeds that concealed footprints, rock formations that provided hidden passages, ridgelines that offered rapid movement above the tree line. These routes connected villages, observation posts, and safe houses in a network that existed entirely outside conventional geography. An enemy could control every major road and still have no access to ninja territory. The mountains themselves provided natural surveillance advantages. Elevated positions offered views across entire valleys. Echo patterns revealed approaching forces hours before visual contact. Animal behavior signaled disturbances in the forest. Weather patterns could be read to predict visibility conditions. Ninja sentries didn't need elaborate watchtowers. The terrain itself functioned as an early warning system that no conventional fortress could replicate. This strategic invisibility was the mountain's greatest gift. A traditional castle announced its presence through its very existence. You could see it from kilometers away, plan your siege, calculate your approach. But a mountain fortress that blended into the landscape offered no such convenience. Enemy scouts could search for weeks without finding anything that resembled a military installation. They'd encounter only what appeared to be poor farming villages, wilderness, or abandoned terrain. The psychological impact was devastating. Samurai generals faced an enemy they couldn't locate, in terrain that exhausted their forces, using tactics that violated every principle of honorable warfare. How do you siege a fortress you can't find? How do you force a battle with an opponent who refuses to reveal their position? The mountains didn't just protect ninja clans physically, they protected them strategically by making conventional military doctrine completely irrelevant. This natural fortress required no stone walls, no moats, no wooden palisades. The mountains were the walls, the forests were the camouflage, the weather was the garrison that never tired and never retreated. For ninja clans, the question wasn't whether to hide in the mountains. The question was how to build communities within them that could sustain life while maintaining complete invisibility. But mountains alone weren't enough. Two regions in particular perfected the art of the hidden fortress, creating communities so well concealed that they became legendary among both ninja and their enemies. These were Iga and Kōga, and their approach to defensive architecture would define ninja strategy for centuries. Two provinces in central Japan became synonymous with ninja culture, Iga and Kōga. These weren't random locations. Their geographic positioning made them nearly perfect for communities that needed to remain hidden while maintaining strategic relevance. Iga province, now part of modern Mie prefecture, sat nestled in a mountainous basin surrounded by peaks on all sides. Kōga, in present-day Shiga prefecture, occupied similar terrain just north. Both regions were close enough to major political centers like Kyoto and Nara to matter strategically, yet remote enough that central authorities struggled to project power into them. The terrain created natural barriers that defined these provinces. Mountain ranges formed walls around Iga's basin, with only a handful of difficult passes providing access. Dense forests covered the slopes, and the inner valleys remained invisible from outside observation points. Kōga's geography mirrored this defensive advantage, with mountains channeling any invasion force through predictable routes that locals could easily monitor and defend. These weren't regions you stumbled into. You had to deliberately choose to enter, and that choice came with consequences. What made Iga and Kōga truly unique wasn't just geography, but social structure. Unlike most of feudal Japan, these regions operated with remarkable autonomy. No single daimyo controlled them completely. Instead, power was distributed among multiple family clans who governed through councils and collective agreements. This decentralization wasn't weakness, it was strategic resilience. There was no central authority to behead, no single castle to capture, no lord whose defeat would collapse the entire system. The social organization reflected this distributed power. Iga province alone contained dozens of ninja families, each controlling their own territory and resources. The Hattori clan, Momochi clan, and Fujibayashi clan were among the most prominent, but numerous smaller families filled out the network. These weren't rival factions constantly warring. They were allied communities who understood that collective survival depended on cooperation. When one family faced threats, others provided reinforcements, intelligence, or refuge. This created a defensive paradigm that samurai strategists found impossible to counter. There was no ninja capital to siege, no headquarters to target. Destroying one family's compound achieved nothing when a dozen others remained operational. It was like fighting fog. You could strike at individual points, but the threat simply reformed elsewhere. The decentralized structure meant that even catastrophic losses in one area didn't compromise the entire network. Fortifications in Iga and Kōga reflected this philosophy completely. Instead of constructing massive castles that centralized military power, these communities integrated defensive features directly into their villages. Homes weren't just residences, they were tactical positions. Temples weren't only religious sites, they were observation posts and communication hubs. Farming terraces doubled as defensive barriers. Every structure served dual purposes, civilian and military, in ways that made them invisible to outside observation. The villages themselves became fortresses through subtle architectural choices. Building placement created natural choke points that favored defenders. Rice paddies and irrigation systems could be flooded to create barriers. Underground cellars connected to tunnel networks. Roof lines were designed to provide firing positions while appearing completely ordinary. An enemy force entering what looked like a simple farming village might not realize they'd walked into a carefully engineered kill zone until arrows started falling from seemingly empty buildings. This collective defense model replaced the individual hero worship common in samurai culture. There were no legendary ninja lords commanding from towering keeps. Success came through community coordination, shared intelligence, and distributed responsibility. Every family contributed scouts, maintained portions of the defensive network, and trained the next generation in techniques passed down through bloodlines. Knowledge wasn't centralized in academies or written manuals. It lived in families who'd practiced these skills for generations. The training and knowledge transmission happened in absolute secrecy. Children learned alongside farming and other civilian skills, with no distinction made between ordinary life and ninja techniques. There were no formal ceremonies or public acknowledgements. A child might spend years learning to read terrain, move silently, and construct improvised tools without ever being told they were receiving ninja training. This ensured that even if enemies captured individuals, they couldn't extract information about training locations or methods because no such formal institutions existed. Family bonds created the ultimate security network. Marriages between ninja clans weren't just romantic arrangements. They were strategic alliances that strengthened information sharing and mutual defense. The Iga and Kōga regions maintained particularly close relationships despite occasional tensions, recognizing that their survival depended on presenting a united front against external threats. When Oda Nobunaga's forces finally invaded Iga in 1581, they faced not just one clan's resistance, but a coordinated defense from dozens of families who'd spent generations preparing for exactly this scenario. The genius of Iga and Kōga lay in creating fortress systems that had no visible center. There was nothing for enemies to target, nothing to besiege, nothing to capture that would signal victory. The fortresses were everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, woven so completely into the landscape and civilian life that distinguishing between village and military installation became impossible. But these invisible fortresses weren't empty shells relying solely on concealment. They contained sophisticated defensive features that would devastate any force that managed to penetrate the outer layers of secrecy. The real nightmare for invading armies began when they thought they'd found their target. For a samurai commander, the most dangerous moment in the mountains of Iga or Kōga was not when his scouts reported nothing. It was when they finally reported something: a cluster of houses, smoke from hearths, terraced fields. At last, a target. A village that could be burned, people that could be captured, ground that could be pacified. But in ninja country, what looked like a vulnerable settlement was often the first layer of a weaponized illusion. The approach began with entrances, if you could even call them that. Paths that appeared to lead into the heart of a settlement were frequently decoys, deliberately worn into the soil to invite enemy passage. These routes guided intruders toward kill zones, dead ends, or areas where the terrain funneled them into maximum exposure. Meanwhile, the real access points for residents were narrow footpaths hidden in vegetation, rock crevices, or routes that seemed too dangerous to be used regularly. False gates and doors amplified this confusion. A sturdy-looking entrance might lead nowhere at all, opening into cramped, useless storage or blind chambers. Some doors were fixed panels designed to consume attackers' attention and time, while defenders maneuvered unseen. Others hid lethal surprises: pits beneath weak flooring, side passages where attackers suddenly found themselves flanked instead of advancing. Beneath the surface, an entirely different world existed. Tunnel networks ran like veins under ninja villages and mountain compounds. These passageways rarely followed straightforward lines. They twisted and branched, linking homes, storage rooms, observation points, hidden exits, and even neighboring hamlets. A pursuer could chase a defender into a structure and find it empty, unaware that their quarry had already vanished into the earth and emerged 2 hills away. These tunnels were not random burrows. They were engineered with precision. Some were narrow, forcing intruders to crawl single file, destroying their ability to fight effectively. Others had deliberate height changes, low ceilings that forced armored men to stoop, tiring them quickly. Certain tunnels met at choke points where defenders could attack from multiple angles, then retreat through passages too small for heavily equipped enemies to follow. Escape routes were designed backwards, starting from worst-case scenarios. If an enemy force broke through the outer layers of defense, where would non-combatants go? How could defenders withdraw without being seen? Every answer became a physical feature: concealed exits behind storage shelves, trapdoors hidden under mats, crawl spaces behind walls that led directly to tunnel networks. Routes were tested repeatedly in darkness and in silence until entire families could navigate them by memory alone. Camouflaged trapdoors were a specialty. The iconic image of floorboards that flipped or dropped wasn't just fiction. It reflected real architectural thinking. Some boards were hinged to swing quietly, creating sudden openings into pits or side chambers. Others were balanced to give way under certain weights, targeting fully armored intruders while supporting lighter-footed residents. The surface above was disguised with tatami mats, scattered objects, or carefully matched grain patterns, so that no visual clue betrayed the danger below. Interior architecture turned buildings into weapons. Corridors inside ninja houses and compounds were often narrow, irregular, and intentionally disorienting. Long, straight hallways, so convenient for marching troops, were rare. Instead, passages bent at sharp angles, abruptly narrowed or ended in apparent dead ends that only locals knew how to pass. These features forced invaders to break formation, move cautiously, and expose themselves at every turn. Many of these tight corridors doubled as ambush channels. Slit-like openings in walls allowed defenders to thrust spears, fire arrows, or observe enemies without being seen. Ceiling panels could be removed from above, letting ninja drop in behind enemy lines or attack from positions attackers never anticipated. Staircases might not lead where they appeared to, splitting midway to divert residents and intruders along different paths. Sound and its absence became a deliberate tool. Some floors were designed to creak loudly at specific points, warning residents of approaching footsteps, while seeming like ordinary construction floors. Other areas used specially fitted joints and materials that minimized noise, allowing defenders to move silently while enemies announced every step. In certain compounds, gravel or shells were arranged in choke points outside, ensuring that anyone attempting a stealthy approach would betray themselves with unavoidable crunching. Silence itself became a weaponized environment. Ninja communities trained their ears to recognize subtle disturbances, a dislodged stone, an unfamiliar rhythm of footsteps, the wrong kind of weight on a floorboard. Structures amplified helpful sounds and suppressed others. Thick earthen walls absorbed echoes that might betray hidden roots. Hollow spaces carried vibrations from movement in distant rooms, turning entire buildings into passive listening devices. All of this served a single principle: architecture designed for chaos, but only for the enemy. For residents, the layout of tunnels, trapdoors, and hidden passages formed a coherent mental map, reinforced from childhood. They knew which wall panel swung aside, which storage box concealed a ladder, which empty alcove opened into a vertical shaft. For invaders, the same space became a maze with no logic, populated by enemies who appeared and vanished like ghosts. The true goal of these defenses was not glorious last stands. It was defense without direct confrontation. Ninja clans knew they could not withstand prolonged battles against fully armed samurai forces, so their architecture focused on delay, confusion, and attrition. Invaders were stripped of organization, exhausted by terrain and structure, and gradually picked off, or allowed to retreat in fear and frustration. Often, by the time samurai realized how compromised they were, the village had already evacuated through tunnels, leaving behind only illusions and silent buildings. Sometimes the most successful defense was an empty stronghold. A settlement that seemed ripe for plunder might already be abandoned, its residents watching from the tree line or distant ridges. Food stores removed, wells sabotaged, supplies booby-trapped, nothing of value left behind. An invading army might spend days occupying a place that was no longer a living community, bleeding time and morale for no gain. To outside observers, these structures looked simple, even primitive. Wooden houses, thatched roofs, earthen walls, a far cry from the grand castles of daimyo and shoguns. But every beam, every floor, every pathway was part of an invisible equation calculated to ensure that ninja survived and their enemies did not. Yet even these defenses were only part of the story. The most extraordinary trick of ninja fortresses wasn't how they fought when found, but how they avoided being noticed in the first place. Their greatest architectural secret was far more radical. Castles designed not to stand out, but to disappear. Traditional Japanese castles were monuments to power. Himeji castles' brilliant white walls, Matsumoto castles' imposing black towers, Osaka castles' massive stone foundations, these structures were built to be seen from kilometers away. They announced dominance, wealth, and military strength. Every architectural choice screamed presence. For ninja clans, this approach was strategic suicide. Ninja architecture began with a revolutionary inversion. The best fortress is the one that doesn't look like a fortress at all. This wasn't simply camouflage or clever concealment. It was a fundamental reimagining of defensive construction where invisibility became the primary design principle, woven into every material choice, every structural decision, every aesthetic element. Materials came exclusively from the immediate environment. While daimyo imported expensive timber and quarried distinctive stone to showcase their resources, ninja builders used whatever surrounded them. Mountain villages employed local wood varieties that matched the forest composition perfectly. Stone came from nearby outcroppings, weathered and colored identically to natural formations. Earth for walls was dug from the site itself, ensuring visual continuity with the landscape. Thatching materials grew wild in the region. This wasn't poverty or lack of ambition, it was calculated strategy. A structure built from local materials became effectively invisible to aerial observation or distant scouting. The wood grain matched surrounding trees. The stone blended with natural rock formations. The earth tones merged with hillsides. From even moderate distances, these buildings dissolved into their environment, indistinguishable from the landscape itself. Profile became the second invisibility factor. Where samurai castles reached skyward with multiple stories, elaborate rooflines and towering keeps, ninja structures hugged the ground. Single-story construction was standard, with rooflines kept deliberately low. Buildings rarely exceeded the height of surrounding vegetation. When multi-level structures were necessary, they were recessed into hillsides or constructed in ways that broke up their silhouette against the horizon. Rooflines received particular attention. Traditional castle architecture featured distinctive curves, ornate gables, and decorative elements that created recognizable profiles. Ninja roofs were designed for visual disruption. Thatching mimicked natural slopes and vegetation patterns. Ridgelines followed terrain contours rather than geometric perfection. From elevated positions, these roofs appeared as natural features. Another fold in the hillside, another patch of wild grass, another section of forest canopy. Some compounds took this further by deliberately irregularizing their structures. Instead of the orderly layouts typical of castle architecture, buildings were positioned to follow natural terrain features. Clusters of structures might be scattered across a slope in patterns that resembled random growth rather than planned construction. Spacing between buildings varied, avoiding the uniform distances that suggested intentional design. The overall impression was organic chaos, not architectural order. The absence of towers was absolute and deliberate. Watchtowers, guard posts, and elevated observation platforms were standard features in conventional military architecture. They provided tactical advantages for surveillance and defense, but they also advertised military function to anyone within visual range. Ninja compounds replaced towers with natural observation points. Ridgelines, rock outcroppings, tree platforms that looked like nothing more than vegetation. The surveillance capability remained. The obvious military signature disappeared. Perhaps most remarkably, some ninja structures were designed to be dismantled. Certain compounds used modular construction techniques that allowed rapid disassembly. Walls weren't permanently fixed, but joined with concealed connectors. Roof sections could be removed and hidden. Floor panels lifted out. Within hours, a functioning compound could be reduced to scattered materials that appeared to be natural debris or abandoned supplies. When threats passed, the same materials could be reassembled. This temporary architecture served multiple purposes. It allowed communities to vanish their fortifications when enemy forces approached, then rebuild after withdrawal. It enabled seasonal occupation patterns that confused intelligence gathering. It meant that even if enemies located and destroyed a site, the loss was minimal because the structure could be recreated elsewhere with little effort or expense. Integration with nature extended beyond visual mimicry. Ninja architects studied how natural elements behaved and incorporated those patterns. Water drainage followed natural flow patterns, avoiding artificial channels that betrayed construction. Vegetation wasn't cleared, but encouraged to grow over and around structures, with planting patterns that accelerated natural coverage. Paths used animal trails or natural depressions rather than cut routes. The goal was structures that didn't just look natural, but functioned as part of the ecosystem. This created a peculiar problem for enemy forces: confirmation. Even when scouts suspected they'd found something, visual evidence was ambiguous. Was that structure a defended position or an abandoned shepherd's hut? Were those earthworks military fortifications or collapsed terracing? Was that cluster of buildings a ninja compound or a legitimate mountain village? Without clear indicators, commanders faced agonizing decisions about where to commit forces. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. Samurai armies expected to recognize fortresses. Their training, their tactics, their siege equipment, all designed for conventional defensive architecture. Ninja fortresses offered nothing to recognize, nothing that fit established categories. This created persistent doubt. Had they found the target? Was there even a target to find? Or were they chasing shadows in terrain that killed armies through exhaustion and frustration? Ninja architecture proved that the most impregnable defense wasn't thicker walls, but the absence of anything to attack. You cannot siege what you cannot identify. You cannot assault what appears to be empty wilderness. The fortresses were there, fully functional, sheltering communities and supporting operations. But they existed in a space between recognition and invisibility, present yet undetectable. This approach violated every principle of military architecture that feudal Japan understood. Castles were supposed to impress, to intimidate, to demonstrate power. Ninja fortresses did none of this. They simply existed, silent and unseen, their presence known only through effects that seemed to emerge from the landscape itself. But invisibility and clever architecture could only delay the inevitable. Eventually, powerful warlords gathered armies too large to deceive and determination too fierce to exhaust. When samurai forces finally came in overwhelming strength, the true test of these hidden fortresses began, not in how they withstood attack, but in how they made entire armies disappear into the mountains without a trace. By the late Sengoku period, ninja activity had become too disruptive to ignore. Assassinations in the night, castles suddenly burned, battle plans leaking to rivals. Daimyo across Japan began to see Iga and Kōga not as remote, troublesome regions, but as threats to their ambition. The most powerful warlords decided the time had come to crush the shadow clans once and for all. Among them was Oda Nobunaga, the iron-willed daimyo who sought to unify Japan by force. Nobunaga depended on discipline, overwhelming firepower, and brutal psychological warfare. For a man who believed in absolute control, the existence of autonomous, semi-independent ninja territories in Iga was intolerable. When Iga operatives participated in plots and covert actions against him, he responded as only a conquering warlord could. He prepared to march an army into the mountains, but sending an army was the easy part. Finding the enemy was something else entirely. On paper, these invasions looked impressive. Thousands of samurai, ashigaru infantry, arquebusiers, and mounted retainers, divided into columns, advanced toward Iga and Kōga. Banner-bearing generals led the way, supply trains followed behind, and intelligence officers carried rough maps showing valleys, villages, and supposed strongholds. The maps were almost useless. Scouts sent ahead reported forests, ravines, mountain passes, and occasional hamlets, but rarely anything that resembled a fortress. The hidden strongholds of ninja clans did not match the expectations of samurai generals. There were no towering keeps on hilltops, no citadels dominating valleys, no great gates to storm. Instead, there were scattered houses, fields, and woodlands that looked indistinguishable from any other rural landscape. Armies that had trained to spot castle silhouettes found themselves staring at tree lines, uncertain where danger actually lay. As they pushed deeper into ninja territory, the terrain began to exert its quiet revenge. Wide formations narrowed into thin lines. Horses stumbled on rocky paths. Armor felt heavier with each steep ascent. Supply wagons bogged down or were forced to remain behind. What had been a cohesive army on the plains became a stretched, vulnerable organism, broken into segments by geography alone. Then the disorientation began. Landmarks described by guides seemed to shift or vanish. A rock formation that should have marked a branching path appeared slightly different. A stream that was supposed to follow a certain course looped in an unexpected direction. Paths doubled back subtly. The same distinctive tree appeared to be passed twice. In some cases, guides were simply ignorant. In others, they were deliberately misleading. Locals coerced into service who secretly sympathized with or belonged to ninja families. Intelligence failures compounded with each step. Reports of enemy villages often turned out to be ordinary settlements or already evacuated sites. Rumors of ninja castles dissolved into nothing more than empty farmsteads. Forces dispatched to flank or encircle supposed strongholds marched in exhausting arcs, only to rejoin their own main column from behind, without ever encountering a real defensive position. All the while, the ninja watched. They tracked troop movements from high ridges, tree hides, and concealed lookouts. Smoke patterns by day, faint glows by night, and the sound of armor and banners in the wind all revealed the invaders' positions with far more accuracy than any map. Messages traveled through relay runners, signal fires carefully shielded from enemy view, and prearranged signals. The ninja knew where the samurai were. The samurai almost never knew where the ninja actually lived. When samurai finally reached a target village, one that intelligence swore was a hub of ninja activity, they often found something deeply unsettling. Nothing. No fighters lining the paths, no ambush at the outskirts, no barricades hastily assembled in panic, just stillness. Huts perhaps, storehouses, a shrine, farmland, maybe a few elderly residents or people too poor or unconnected to flee. The core ninja population was gone. Under floors and behind walls, trapdoors gaped open over tunnels already used and abandoned. Storage containers stood empty. Valuable tools, weapons, and documents had vanished. Wells might be fouled, food removed, paths rigged with simple delaying traps. But the real targets, the trained operatives and their leaders, had slipped away long before the army arrived. For a commander expecting a glorious crushing of the enemy, the effect was maddening. Each victory felt hollow. Villages could be burned, fields torched, structures leveled, but no decisive battle was won. No central fortress captured, no symbolic banner torn down from towering walls. The enemy refused to stand and fight in a way that could be measured, recorded, or celebrated. In some campaigns, entire detachments simply disappeared into the terrain. Misled by poor maps or false paths, small units became separated and never found their way back. Some died from exposure, starvation, or accidents in treacherous ravines. Others walked into carefully prepared traps, rockfalls triggered from above, pits concealed under foliage, arrows released from invisible firing points along ridges and tree lines. The ninja did not need to annihilate armies. They needed only to bleed them, exhaust them, and deny them targets. A snapped bowstring at the wrong time, a commander's horse falling from a narrow path, a sudden attack on a supply column at dusk. The psychological pressure mounted with every inexplicable loss and every failed attempt to bring the enemy to a clear, honorable battle. By dawn, more than once, samurai forces occupying a captured village awoke to a chilling discovery. They were completely alone. The surrounding hills, which they assumed were empty, now felt like watching eyes. Tools left in the night had disappeared. Tracks in the dust suggested someone had walked between sleeping guards without being seen. Messages from other detachments failed to arrive. The feeling of control quietly eroded. This was silent psychological warfare. Each day that passed without a decisive engagement, each night spent in hostile territory with no visible enemy, wore down morale. Commanders started doubting their guides, their scouts, even their own maps. Some saw treachery everywhere. Others grew paranoid, ordering executions or harsh punishments that turned local civilians into enemies. The ninja did not need to spread fear directly. The mountains did it for them, amplified by careful, calculated harassment. Yet it would be wrong to imagine ninja as invincible phantoms. Historically, invasions like Nobunaga's Iga campaign in 1581 inflicted catastrophic damage. Villages were burned, many ninja were killed, and the political autonomy of regions like Iga was broken. But even in defeat, something remarkable happened. The complete destruction of ninja fortresses never quite occurred. Survivors scattered, taking their knowledge, tactics, and invisible architectural principles with them. Some entered the service of the very lords who'd invaded their homelands, becoming covert operatives and intelligence specialists. Others vanished into new mountain regions, rebuilding in smaller, even more secret communities. The castles that samurai armies sought to destroy turned out not to be fixed places, but living systems, networks of people, skills, and methods that could relocate and reform. The warlords could burn buildings and kill residents. What they could not easily kill was an idea, a way of turning land itself into a fortress and erasing strongholds from sight. And centuries later, when archaeologists and historians went looking for proof of these hidden castles, they faced the same haunting question that frustrated samurai. Where exactly had these fortresses ever truly stood? To answer that, we have to climb back into the mountains, not with armies but with shovels, old maps and fragments of memory, to uncover what ruins, traces and secrets of these invisible strongholds still remain. Finding evidence of ninja fortresses today is like trying to photograph smoke. The very features that made them effective, their invisibility, their integration with landscape, their deliberate lack of monumental architecture, are precisely what makes them nearly impossible to locate centuries later. Yet fragments remain scattered across the mountains of central Japan, waiting for those who know how to look. Archaeological work in Iga and Kōga has uncovered subtle traces that mainstream history books often overlook. Earthwork patterns that don't match standard agricultural terracing. Stone arrangements too deliberate to be natural, but too understated to be obvious fortifications. Depressions in hillsides that suggest collapsed tunnels or filled-in escape routes. These aren't dramatic discoveries like castle foundations or moat systems. They're whispers in the soil, hints of structures designed to leave minimal trace. In the mountains around what was once Iga province, hikers occasionally stumble across ruins that don't quite make sense. A stone wall fragment that seems to serve no purpose, positioned where no rice paddy or boundary would logically exist. A leveled platform on a slope with no clear agricultural or residential function. Remnants of what might have been lookout positions, placed not for scenic views, but for tactical surveillance of approach routes through valleys below. These sites rarely appear in tourist guides or heritage listings because they resist easy categorization. They're not grand enough to be castles, not complete enough to be preserved villages, and too ambiguous to be confidently labeled as ninja sites. Yet local historians and researchers familiar with ninja tactical thinking recognize the patterns. Locations chosen for observation and escape, minimal construction that has weathered away almost entirely, strategic positioning that makes sense only through a defensive lens. Several villages in the region maintain oral traditions about their ninja past, though separating fact from legend grows harder with each generation. Elderly residents speak of houses that once had more rooms than their exteriors suggested, of cellars that seemed too deep, of attic spaces accessible through hidden panels. Most of these structures were rebuilt or demolished in the modern era, erasing physical evidence while preserving memory in family stories passed down through centuries. Historical documents provide frustratingly incomplete pictures. Ninja clans deliberately avoided written records that could compromise operational security. When documents do exist, they're often vague or coded. A Tokugawa-era administrative record might mention mountain villages with unusual construction or settlements showing defensive characteristics inconsistent with their size. But these clinical descriptions fail to capture the sophisticated systems they're describing. The most detailed written accounts often come from the perspective of those who invaded ninja territories. Reports from Oda Nobunaga's campaigns describe the difficulty of locating targets and the disorienting nature of the terrain, but they rarely provide precise locations or detailed architectural descriptions. Samurai chroniclers had little interest in documenting structures they considered beneath the dignity of proper military architecture. To them, ninja compounds were primitive, unworthy of the detailed records given to proper castles. Some sites have been intentionally preserved, though often without full public acknowledgement of their ninja connections. The Ninja Museum of Igaryu in Mai Prefecture occupies grounds that historical research suggests were once part of a ninja family compound. The main building demonstrates typical architectural features: hidden compartments, concealed passages, rotating walls, and floor panels designed to reveal trapdoors. While reconstructed for educational purposes, these features are based on documented techniques and surviving structural evidence from authenticated sites. Other locations remain unmarked and unprotected. In remote sections of former Kōga territory, stone foundations occasionally emerge after heavy rains, exposed where erosion has stripped away centuries of soil and vegetation. These discoveries are rarely reported to authorities because they occur on private land. In areas with little archaeological oversight, landowners might notice, but think nothing of what appears to be old stonework from abandoned structures, never realizing they might be walking over the remains of defensive positions. What was deliberately destroyed often tells its own story. When Tokugawa Ieyasu consolidated power after unifying Japan, he employed many Iga and Kōga ninja as official intelligence agents. Part of this arrangement reportedly involved dismantling certain fortified sites to prevent them from becoming rallying points for resistance or banditry. Tunnels were collapsed, defensive earthworks deliberately filled, and structures razed. This wasn't just military victory. It was erasure of a way of life that threatened centralized authority. The irony is that this destruction was partly redundant. Many ninja architectural features were already designed to disappear. Wooden structures decomposed naturally. Earthworks weathered back into hillsides. Vegetation reclaimed cleared spaces within years. Unlike stone castles that stand as ruins for centuries, ninja fortifications reverted to landscape almost immediately once abandoned. Nature completed what intentional destruction began. Perhaps most significantly, many secrets were simply never recorded at all. Oral transmission of tactical knowledge meant that when ninja clans dispersed or were absorbed into official service, specialized information died with practitioners who saw no reason to document it. Tunnel locations, trap mechanisms, specific architectural techniques, these remained family secrets that evaporated when the families themselves were destroyed or assimilated into mainstream society. Modern technology offers new possibilities for discovery. Ground-penetrating radar has identified subsurface anomalies consistent with tunnel networks beneath several historical sites in Iga. LiDAR mapping has revealed subtle terrain modifications invisible to ground-level observation. These tools occasionally detect patterns suggesting deliberate construction hidden beneath centuries of growth and erosion. Yet even with advanced technology, confirmation remains elusive. A subsurface void might be a collapsed tunnel or a natural limestone cavity. An earthwork pattern could indicate defensive construction or simply generations of agricultural modification. Without written records or surviving structural elements, interpretation depends heavily on context, comparison, and informed speculation. The frustrating reality is that we will likely never know the full extent of ninja fortress networks. The very success of their design philosophy, structures that left minimal trace, locations known only to initiating families, architecture that decomposed or could be dismantled, ensures that most sites have returned to the landscape that concealed them centuries ago. What remains are fragments, a foundation here, an oral tradition there, ambiguous earthworks that might be significant or might be nothing. Each piece suggests a larger system we can only partially reconstruct. It's like having torn pages from a book written in code, offering glimpses of a sophisticated defensive network that existed in the shadows of recorded history. But here's where the story becomes even more complex, separating what actually existed from what legend created. Because while ninja fortresses were real, the mythology surrounding them has become so elaborate that distinguishing historical fact from centuries of embellishment requires examining where history ends and legend begins. Modern popular culture has given us ninja who leap impossible distances, vanish in explosions of smoke, scale vertical walls with supernatural ease, and possess martial abilities bordering on magic. These depictions, while entertaining, have created a thick fog between historical reality and fantasy. Nowhere is this distortion more evident than in how people imagine ninja fortresses. Cinema and television transformed hidden mountain compounds into elaborate underground lairs, complete with training halls carved from solid rock, armories filled with exotic weapons, and vast subterranean networks worthy of James Bond villains. Films show impossibly complex trap systems, rooms that rotate at the touch of a pressure plate, and architectural features that would require engineering knowledge centuries ahead of their time. These images have become so embedded in collective imagination that they're often mistaken for historical fact. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more impressive. Historical ninja didn't have secret bases that rivaled medieval castles in complexity. What they had was far more practical. Ordinary-looking structures enhanced with subtle defensive features, communities that appeared civilian but functioned militarily, and architectural choices that prioritized function over dramatic effect. The genius wasn't in building underground fortresses, it was in making defensive positions look like they weren't defensive positions at all. What can be historically confirmed is relatively modest. We know ninja clans occupied mountain regions, particularly Iga and Kōga. We have documented evidence of their involvement in espionage, assassination, and covert operations. Records confirm that these communities maintained some degree of autonomy and resisted central authority. Archaeological evidence supports the existence of structures with hidden compartments, concealed passages, and features consistent with defensive purposes disguised as civilian construction. We also have technical manuals like the Bansen Shukai, compiled in 1676, which documents ninja techniques, tools, and tactics. This text confirms that operational security, disguise, and strategic deception were central to ninja practice. It describes methods for creating hidden spaces, moving silently and gathering intelligence, practical skills, not supernatural powers. But enormous gaps remain. Precise locations of most fortified sites are unknown. The full extent of tunnel networks, if they existed as extensively as legend suggests, cannot be verified. Many architectural techniques were deliberately not recorded, passed down only through families who are now extinct or assimilated. The most successful defensive strategies were likely the ones never documented, because documentation itself was a security risk. This uncertainty is exactly what keeps the mystery alive. Unlike European castles or samurai fortifications, which left undeniable physical evidence, ninja strongholds were designed to be forgotten. Their architecture embraced impermanence. Their operational doctrine assumed eventual discovery and dispersal. The absence of evidence isn't a failure of historical record, it's proof that the system worked as intended. Popular culture has consistently confused strategic invisibility with mythical abilities. When historical accounts describe ninja disappearing, they often mean tactical withdrawal through prepared escape routes or concealment in terrain, not literal vanishing. When sources mention castle networks, they're describing interconnected defensive positions across communities, not sprawling underground complexes. The exaggeration isn't entirely modern. Even contemporary accounts from ninja enemies sometimes amplified their capabilities, possibly because admitting you'd been outmaneuvered by ordinary tactics was more embarrassing than claiming your opponent possessed uncanny abilities. The confusion between myth and strategy reveals something important about how ninja actually operated. Their effectiveness depended partly on mystique. If enemies believed ninja could vanish into thin air, commanders became paranoid, troops grew fearful, and psychological pressure mounted before any actual combat occurred. Ninja clans likely encouraged some misconceptions because reputation was itself a defensive weapon. Why risk direct confrontation when your enemy's imagination does half the work? This strategic ambiguity extended to their fortresses. If invading forces couldn't determine what was a legitimate military target versus a civilian village, they faced impossible choices: attack everything and waste resources while creating civilian resentment, attack selectively and potentially miss real threats. The uncertainty was weaponized, turning gaps in intelligence into psychological warfare. The real legacy of ninja fortresses isn't found in specific structures or locations. It's found in a philosophy of defense that inverted conventional military thinking. While the rest of feudal Japan built upward, ninja built inward and outward simultaneously, inward into concealment, outward into landscape integration. While others announced their presence, ninja erased it. While traditional castles declared, "We are here and powerful," ninja strongholds whispered, "We might be anywhere or nowhere at all." This approach influenced defensive thinking beyond ninja communities. Later, Japanese castle design incorporated elements of deception, hidden passages, and strategic misdirection. The idea that fortifications could be psychological as much as physical, that invisibility might trump visibility, represented a fundamental shift in how warfare and defense were conceptualized. Today, the historical truth sits uncomfortably between documented fact and persistent legend. We know enough to confirm that ninja fortresses existed, that they employed sophisticated architectural techniques, and that they successfully resisted detection and assault. We don't know enough to map their full extent, reconstruct their complete defensive systems, or separate every element of truth from centuries of elaboration. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be. The art of never being seen doesn't end when the practitioners vanish. It extends into how their history is remembered, studied, and understood. The fortresses that were designed to be invisible during their operational lifetime have remained partially invisible even in historical analysis. The strategy outlived the structures. So what does all this reveal about military architecture, defensive strategy, and the nature of power itself? The answer lies not in what these hidden castles were, but in what they represented, and why the deadliest fortresses in feudal Japan were the ones that refused to be seen at all. History remembers the towering castles, Himeji's white elegance, Osaka's massive walls, Edinburgh's commanding presence on its volcanic rock. These monuments to power still draw millions of visitors who marvel at their engineering and scale. Yet for all their grandeur, they shared a fatal vulnerability. They could be found, besieged, and eventually conquered. Ninja fortresses proved that true defensive genius wasn't measured in height or thickness of walls, but in the ability to control enemy perception. A castle everyone can see becomes a target everyone can attack. A fortress that vanishes into mountains becomes a target no army can effectively engage. The most impregnable defense wasn't stone, it was doubt. This philosophy extended beyond architecture into the essence of ninja strategy: control through information, denial, power through invisibility, victory through avoiding the very terms of conventional warfare. While samurai measured success in battles won and territories held, ninja measured it in missions completed and communities surviving. Different metrics, different architecture, different legacy. The hidden fortresses of Iga and Kōga weren't just buildings. They were manifestations of a radical idea: That you could be most powerful when your enemy couldn't find you, most secure when your defenses were invisible, most effective when you refused to fight on anyone's terms but your own. Centuries after the last ninja fortress faded back into the mountains, that principle endures. What hidden strategies from history fascinate you most? Subscribe for more untold stories that changed warfare forever. Like this video if invisible fortresses blew your mind, and drop a comment. Could modern military strategy learn anything from ninja architectural thinking? Let's discuss in the comments below.